The job posting said, Overnight Inventory Specialist, which sounded better than what it actually was, scanning barcodes in a massive, half-empty warehouse while the rest of the world slept. But I needed the money. The divorce had stripped me down to nothing, and this new town didn't offer much in the way of opportunities for a 31-year-old, with a liberal arts degree and a decade of retail management experience. So when the recruiter called about a graveyard shift position, midnight to 8 a.m., premium pay, minimal supervision, I said yes before asking any real questions. The Midwest Distribution Center sat at the end of Millrace Road, past the last working streetlight and the abandoned tire factory that everyone said would be demolished any day now for the past 15 years. The building itself was unremarkable, a sprawling concrete box with a corrugated metal roof, narrow windows near the roofline that never seemed to let in enough light, and loading docks that looked like they'd been repainted in the Reagan administration. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, topped with rusted barbed wire that sagged in places like it had given up, trying to keep anything out or in. Arrived for my first shift at 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday in March. The parking lot was nearly empty. Just two other vehicles near the employee entrance, a white supervisor's van and an older pickup truck with a dented tailgate. The asphalt was cracked and uneven, puddles of standing water reflecting the sickly yellow glow of the sodium vapor lights. When I got out of my car, the air smelled like old grease and something faintly chemical that I couldn't quite place. Inside, the warehouse was exactly what I expected, industrial and impersonal. The front office area had scratched linoleum floors, a time clock that looked like it predated digital displays, and a bulletin board covered in OSHA posters that no one had looked at in years. But it was the warehouse floor itself that made me pause when I first walked through the double doors. The space was enormous. Metal racking systems stretched from floor to ceiling easily 30 feet high, creating narrow aisles that disappeared into shadow. Cardboard boxes were stacked on wooden pallets, each one labeled with faded shipping codes and barcodes. The overhead lights were motion-activated in some sections, clicking on with a buzzing hum as I walked beneath them, then flickering sporadically as if deciding whether I was worth the effort. The HVAC system rumbled constantly, a low mechanical moan that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Some aisles felt unnaturally cold when I passed them, while others were stuffy and warm, as if the building had its own circulatory system that didn't quite work right. The back section of the warehouse past aisle 20, according to the faded numbers stenciled on the concrete floor, was darker than the rest, the lights either broken or simply not installed. I could see the silhouettes of more racking back there, but the shadows were too deep to make out any details. The day supervisor, Lena Torres, was waiting for me in the office. She was maybe 45, with tired eyes and graying hair pulled back in a ponytail. She wore the standard issue safety vest over a company polo shirt and carried herself with the weary efficiency of someone who'd worked here far too long. "Mark Davis?" she asked, glancing at a clipboard. "That's me." She nodded and gestured for me to sit. "Welcome to the graveyard shift. It's pretty straightforward work: inventory counts, order verification, some light restocking if we're behind. You'll be alone most nights, which some people like and some people don't. The pay is good because not many people want to work these hours." "Sounds fine to me," I said. "I'm not really a people person anyway." Lena's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes: recognition, maybe, or pity. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a laminated sheet of paper, sliding it across the desk to me. "These are the operational rules for the midnight shift. Some of them are standard safety protocols. Others are specific to this facility." I picked up the sheet. The header read, "Midnight Operations Safety and Conduct Rules," in bold, official-looking font. I skimmed the first few entries. "Wear your safety vest at all times. No operating forklifts without certification. Keep emergency exits clear." Normal stuff. Then I got to the others. "Do not walk down aisle 17 between 12 a.m. and 3 a.m. if you hear someone say your name over the intercom and no one is in the office. Ignore it. At 2:07 a.m. exactly. You must be inside the main office with the door closed. Do not look at the monitors until 2:10 a.m. if you see a coworker without a safety vest in the aisles. After 1 a.m., do not approach them. If the warehouse alarm chirps once, single tone, and nobody triggered it, stay where you are and do not speak for 1 minute." I looked up at Lena. waiting for her to crack a smile or tell me this was some kind of hazing ritual for new hires. She didn't. These are serious? I asked, completely. Come on. Don't look at the monitors until 2:10? What is this? Some kind of warehouse ghost story? Lena leaned forward, her voice flat and serious. Follow the rules and the shift is easy. Ignore them, and it's not. I laughed, nervous, awkward, but she didn't join in. The silence that followed was heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, I nodded. Okay, sure, I'll follow the rules. She stood and handed me a handheld scanner, a radio clipped to a belt, and a safety vest with my name already written on the back in black marker. You'll do fine. Just remember, the building has its own rhythms at night. Don't fight them. Work with them. By the time the clock struck midnight and the last of the day crew filtered out through the employee entrance, I was alone. The building's ambient noise changed almost immediately. The FE system seemed louder, more insistent, like something breathing through clogged lungs. The lights buzzed with a frequency I hadn't noticed before. The metal racks creaked and groaned as they settled, or expanded, or did whatever industrial shelving does when no one's watching. I told myself it was just my imagination, the product of too many late nights and Lena's weird rules rattling around in my head. A factory is just a factory. Ghosts don't punch time cards. But as I walked down aisle 3 with my scanner beeping steadily in my hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that the building was watching me, waiting to see if I'd follow the rules or break them. The first few hours were unremarkable. I spent my time scanning barcodes, cross-referencing SKU numbers on my handheld device, and checking pallet labels against the inventory manifest. The work was repetitive and mind-numbing, which I'd expected. What I hadn't expected was how the silence between the beeps of my scanner and the hum of the overhead lights seemed to expand, becoming something almost physical. I'd worked nights before retail. Management often meant closing shifts, but this was different. In a store, there were always cars passing outside, the occasional customer knocking on the locked door, the distant sound of other businesses shutting down for the night. Here, there was nothing. Just the warehouse and me, and the sense that the building itself was settling into some kind of nocturnal routine that I was only beginning to understand, around 12:30 a.m. I was halfway down aisle 9 when the overhead intercom crackled to life. The sound was abrupt and jarring in the silence, a burst of static followed by a voice. It was distorted, compressed through old speakers, but clear enough to make out the words. Mark, reporting to aisle 17. I stopped walking. My first thought was that Lena had forgotten to tell me something, that she'd called from her car or from home to give me additional instructions. But the voice didn't quite sound like hers. The cadence was wrong, too slow, with strange pauses between words, as if whoever was speaking had to think about each syllable before saying it. I glanced around. The intercom speakers were mounted near the ceiling at regular intervals throughout the warehouse, small black boxes with wire grills. None of them should have been active unless someone was in the office using the PA system. I keyed my radio. Lena? You still here? Static. Then silence. I made my way toward the front office, my footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. As I passed aisle 17, I slowed despite myself. Glancing down the narrow corridor between the racks, the aisle looked normal stacked boxes. Wooden pallets, the same industrial monotony as every other row. But the lights overhead flickered once, twice, and for just a split second, the aisle seemed to stretch, extending far beyond where the back wall should have been. Then the lights steadied, and everything snapped back into place. The aisle was just an aisle, ending at the concrete barrier maybe 100 feet away. I shook my head and kept walking. Lack of sleep, I told myself. Stress. The divorce. All of it catching up to me. When I reached the office, I pushed open the door. The room was empty. The chair behind the desk sat vacant, the overhead light casting harsh shadows across the cluttered workspace. The intercom microphone hung on its hook, untouched. I checked the PA system's control panel, an old analog, board with buttons and switches that looked like they hadn't been updated since the 80s. The log screen, a small LCD display that tracked system activity, showed no recent announcements. I stood there for a moment trying to rationalize what I'd heard. Maybe it was a recording, some automated message triggered by a timer or a motion sensor. Maybe the system was glitching, playing back old announcements from previous shifts. But when I turned to leave the office, the intercom crackled again. "Mark. Mark, this way." The voice was clearer this time. And it was mine, not similar to mine. Not a coincidental vocal match. It was my voice, my intonation, the slight Midwestern flattening of vowels that I'd never been able to shake. I was hearing myself calling to me from somewhere inside the warehouse. My skin went cold. I walked quickly back to the breaker panel near the loading dock and flipped the switch labeled PA. System. The intercom speakers went silent with a soft electronic whine, and the sudden absence of that ambient hum made the warehouse feel even emptier. I expected relief. Instead, the silence that followed was heavier. More oppressive, like the building itself was holding its breath and waiting to see what I'd do next. I returned to my work, scanning boxes and checking manifests. But my hands were shaking. I kept the radio volume turned up, half expecting another voice to come through. But there was only static and the occasional crackle of interference. At 1:15 a.m. I heard footsteps. They were distant, echoing from somewhere deeper in the warehouse past aisle 12. Maybe near the back section that I'd been avoiding instinctively. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, the sound of work boots on concrete. I keyed my radio again. "Hello? Anyone else working tonight?" No response. The footsteps continued for another 10 seconds, then stopped abruptly. I stood perfectly still, listening. The HVAC system rumbled on. The lights buzzed overhead. But the footsteps didn't resume. I thought about the rules Lena had given me. If you see a coworker without a safety vest in the aisles after 1 a.m., do not approach them. It was almost funny how specific that was, how oddly precise. As if someone had learned that rule the hard way, I stayed where I was, finishing the pallet I'd been working on, then moved to the next aisle away from the direction of the footsteps. My scanner beeped rhythmically, a small comfort in the overwhelming silence, but every so often, I thought I heard something else beneath the mechanical hum. A faint shuffling, the creak of metal. A sound that could have been breathing if I let myself believe it. I didn't let myself believe it. By 2 a.m. I'd convinced myself that I was overreacting. That the first night in a new job was always disorienting, that my mind was playing tricks on me. I was tired, anxious, and working alone in a place that was designed to feel impersonal and isolating. Of course I was hearing things. Of course the building felt strange, but I couldn't ignore the rules. And at 2:07 a.m., I was inside the office with the door closed. Just like the laminated sheet had instructed. I sat in the desk chair, staring at the wall clock as the second hand swept toward 2:10. Security monitors, 6 small screens mounted on a rack above the desk, were dark. I turned them off when I'd entered, following the rule about not looking at them until the designated time. The 3 minutes stretched impossibly long. The office felt too small, the air too still. I could hear my own breathing. The faint creak of the chair beneath me, and underneath it all, a low hum that seemed to rise up through the floor itself, vibrating in my chest. At 2:10 a.m. exactly. I turned the monitors back on. The screens flickered to life, displaying grainy black and white feeds from cameras positioned throughout the warehouse. Most of them showed empty aisles, stacks of boxes, the occasional forklift parked in a bay. But 2 of the screens showed only static, white noise rolling across the displays like waves. I watched the static for a long moment, waiting for it to clear. It didn't, and then just before I looked away, one of the static-filled screens cleared for a fraction of a second. Long enough for me to see a figure standing in the frame, tall, too thin, facing directly toward the camera with its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Then the static returned, and the figure was gone. I sat there, my heart pounding, telling myself it was a glitch. A compression artifact, a trick of the old cameras and outdated recording equipment, but I didn't believe that, and I knew, with a certainty that settled cold and heavy in my gut, that the rules weren't hazing. They weren't superstition or tradition or some elaborate inside joke. They were survival. I didn't sleep well the next day. I kept replaying the image from the monitor in my head, the tall, wrong figure with its tilted head. By the time I returned to the warehouse the following night, I'd half convinced myself that I'd imagined it, that exhaustion and stress were warping my perception. But Lena's expression when I clocked in told me she knew better. She didn't ask how my first night had gone. She just nodded, handed me the scanner, and said, "You came back. That's good." I wanted to ask her what she meant, But before I could, a younger guy walked into the office from the warehouse floor. He was in his mid-20s, wearing a safety vest over a faded band t-shirt and carrying a clipboard. He had the easy confidence of someone who'd worked here long enough to feel comfortable, but not long enough to be worn down by it. "Yo, Lena," he said, barely glancing at me. "I'm gonna finish up those pallets in the back before I bounce. Probably another hour." Lena's jaw tightened slightly. "Jared, I told you not to hang over into graveyard shift anymore. It's just an hour. I'm almost done." He finally looked at me, sizing me up. "You the new guy?" "Mark," I said. "Jared, second shift, but I do what needs doing." He grinned. "Don't let Lena scare you with the weird rules. Half of it's just corporate covering their ass for insurance." Lena's voice went flat. "The rules are there for a reason." Jared rolled his eyes and headed back toward the warehouse floor. Yeah. I know. Don't walk down aisle 17 after midnight. Don't answer the intercom, blah blah blah. It's just an old building, Lena. Weird wiring, bad ventilation, creepy vibes. That's it." He disappeared through the double doors before Lena could respond. She turned to me, and for the first time I saw something other than weariness in her eyes. It was worry. "Stay away from him tonight," she said quietly. "If he tries to get you involved in anything, just stay in your section and do your work." "Why? What's he going to do?" She didn't answer. She just gathered her things and left. And I was alone with the building again, except this time Jared was somewhere inside it. And the rules didn't seem to apply to him. I spent the first hour of my shift working methodically through aisles 4 through 8, scanning and logging inventory. I could hear Jared's forklift occasionally, the backup alarm beeping in the distance, the hydraulic whine of the lift mechanism. He was working somewhere near the back past aisle 15, around 1:15 a.m. I heard his voice echo through the warehouse. "Yo, Mark! Come here for a sec." I hesitated, then walked toward the sound. I found Jared near aisle 16, standing beside his parked forklift with his hands on his hips, staring down the row. "What's up?" I asked. He gestured toward aisle 17, which was directly adjacent. "There's a high-value pallet down there, electronics, I think, that got logged wrong. System says it's supposed to be in 14, but I'm pretty sure someone moved it. I need to grab it before I leave, but Lena's always weird about this aisle at night." I remembered the rule. Do not walk down aisle 17 between 12 a.m. and 3 a.m. "Maybe just leave it until tomorrow," I said. Jared laughed. "Dude, it's just a row of shelves. There's nothing magic about it. Watch." Before I could stop him, he climbed back onto the forklift and drove toward aisle 17. The machine's backup alarm chirped rhythmically as he maneuvered into position, the forks lowering as he prepared to retrieve the pallet. I stayed where I was, watching from a distance. The overhead lights in aisle 17 flickered once as Jared's forklift rolled into the narrow corridor between the racks. Then they settled into a dim, sickly glow that seemed dimmer than it should have been, as if the light itself was being absorbed by something. The backup alarm continued beeping, but the sound grew muffled and distant, like it was coming from farther away than it should have been. I could still see the forklift. It was maybe 40 feet down the aisle, but it looked smaller, receding as if the perspective was wrong. Then the RFID scanner clipped to my belt began beeping rapidly. I pulled it free and glanced at the screen. It was lighting up with phantom tags, Cisco numbers that didn't correspond to anything in the system, flashing too quickly to read. The digital map of the warehouse on the scanner's display showed Jared's forklift icon moving in tight circles around the same point, looping endlessly. "Jared?" I called out. No response. The forklift kept moving deeper into the aisle, the sound of its engine not matching the distance. It should have reached the back wall by now. Aisle 17 was only about 100 feet long, but the forklift just kept going. Smaller and smaller, like it was driving into a tunnel that shouldn't exist. I heard his voice once, faint and distorted, as if filtered through water. "Where's the end of this row?" My chest tightened. I took a step toward the aisle, then stopped. Every instinct screamed at me to go after him, to run down that row and pull him back. But Lena's voice echoed in my head. "Follow the rules." The lights over aisle 17 suddenly went out, plunging the corridor into complete darkness. The forklift's backup alarm cut off mid-beep, and the warehouse fell into a silence so profound that I could hear my own heartbeat. ran to the electrical panel near the loading dock and threw the breaker for that section. The lights came back on, harsh and fluorescent, flooding aisle 17 with sterile brightness. The aisle was empty. No forklift. No Jared. Just rows of boxes stacked neatly on pallets, undisturbed. The concrete floor was smooth and clean, no tire marks from the forklift. No sign that anyone had been there at all. Except for one thing. In the center of the aisle, perfectly equidistant between the two rows of racking, was Jared's safety vest. It was folded neatly, the fabric crisp and precise, as if someone had taken great care to arrange it just so. I approached slowly, my legs shaking. When I reached the vest, I knelt down and touched it. The fabric was ice cold, so cold that it burned my fingertips. I jerked my hand back, stumbling to my feet. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the vest, waiting for Jared to jump out and tell me it was a prank. But he didn't. The warehouse was silent, except for the omnipresent hum of the Havacan, the buzzing lights overhead. I picked up my radio with trembling hands. Lena, are you there? Static. I tried calling the main office number from the phone on the wall. It rang and rang, then went to voicemail. Lena's recorded voice, calm and professional, asked me to leave a message. I hung up and walked back to the office, leaving Jared's vest where I'd found it. I told myself I'd file a report in the morning. That there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe he'd gotten scared and run out of the building. Maybe he was playing some kind of elaborate joke, but I didn't believe that. I sat in the office, door closed, and stared at the monitors until my shift ended at 8 a.m. Jared's forklift never reappeared. The footage from the cameras near aisle 17 showed nothing unusual. Just empty aisles and static-filled gaps where the feeds glitched out. When I left the building that morning, Jared's truck was still in the parking lot, rusted tailgate gleaming in the early light. He never came back for it. I should have quit. Any sane person would have walked away after what happened to Jared and never looked back. But I needed the money, and some part of me, the stubborn, rational part that had gotten me through the divorce and the move to this terrible town, refused to believe that the warehouse was anything more than a building with faulty wiring and strange acoustics. So I returned the next night. And the night after that. Lena didn't mention Jared. When I asked her about him on my third shift, she just said he'd moved on to another job and left it at that. But I could see the lie in her eyes, the way she wouldn't quite meet my gaze. I started paying closer attention to the building itself. During my breaks, I explored the office, looking for anything that might explain the rules or what had happened to Jared. Most of what I found was mundane, outdated safety manuals, time cards from employees who'd long since quit, maintenance logs filled with notes about broken lights and HVAC repairs. But on my fifth night, I found something else. It was in a bottom drawer of the supervisor's desk, buried beneath binders and old requisition forms. A battered clipboard holding a stack of printed emails and incident reports, the paper yellowed with age. Some of the documents were dated more than a decade ago, back when the warehouse had apparently run 3 full shifts instead of just 2. I spread the papers out on the desk and started reading. The first few reports were routine. Minor injuries, equipment malfunctions, complaints about inadequate lighting. But as I dug deeper, the tone changed. Entries began mentioning sensor anomalies around aisle 17, particularly during the overnight hours. Employees reported hearing voices over the intercom when no one was in the office. Multiple workers complained of feeling watched, of hearing footsteps in empty sections of the warehouse. One email, dated September 2011, caught my attention. It was from a night shift supervisor named Marcus Holloway to the regional operations manager. We've had 3 separate incidents this month involving aisle 17. 2 employees refused to work that section after hearing voices calling their names. A third employee, Miguel Reyes, reported seeing someone without a safety vest standing at the far end of the aisle during his 2 a.m. break. When he went to investigate, he found the aisle empty. I'm recommending we cordon off this section until maintenance can inspect the electrical and PA systems. The response from corporate was brief and dismissive. Noted. Employees are reminded to follow all safety protocols and report equipment malfunctions immediately. No evidence of systemic issues at this time. I kept reading. Another report, this one from October 2011, described a forklift accident in aisle 17. The operator, a man named David Chan, had been found unconscious near his overturned vehicle. He'd been hospitalized with a severe head injury and later claimed he couldn't remember what had happened. The only physical evidence was blood on the metal racking and a security camera feed that had looped the same 5 seconds of footage over and over, showing nothing useful. David Chen never returned to work. According to the report, he'd quit via email and moved out of state. There were more incidents. A woman named Sarah Kim who'd heard her own voice calling to her from the back of the warehouse. A maintenance worker who'd reported finding footprints in dust that led into aisle 17 and simply stopped, as if whoever made them had vanished mid-step. And then I found the handwritten note. It was scrawled in the margin of one of the reports. The ink faded but still legible. Stop trying to close it off. It just moves. Better to contain it than chase it. Below that, in a different hand, late shift reduced to 1 worker effective immediately. Too many disappearances. New protocols attached. I flipped through the remaining pages and found a document titled Emergency Procedure Midnight Operations Draft. It was dated January 2012. Most of the text had been redacted with thick black marker, but a few lines were still visible. If the warehouse begins looping aisles or repeating PA announcements, the affected zone is considered compromised. All staff must evacuate and lock doors. Do not re-enter until at least 1 full day-night cycle has passed. And at the bottom, stamped in red ink, not approved, see revised protocols. Revised protocols were the rules I'd been given on my first night. Simplified, clinical, stripped of any explanation or context. Just a list of arbitrary-seeming instructions that corporate could claim were standard safety procedures if anyone ever asked questions. I sat back in the chair, my mind racing. The warehouse wasn't just strange, it was actively dangerous and had been for years. The rules weren't superstition or tradition. They were a containment strategy, developed through trial and error and written in the blood of employees who'd ignored them or never been warned at all. That night, I followed the rules to the letter. I stayed out of aisle 17. I ignored the faint voice that called my name over the intercom at 1:45 a.m., even though it sounded exactly like my ex-wife. At 2:07, I locked myself in the office and didn't look at the monitors until 2:10. But the building was changing. I could feel it. The aisles seemed subtly different than they had been on my first night. The boxes stacked in configurations I didn't remember. The layout felt off, as if the warehouse was rearranging itself when I wasn't looking. Testing me, seeing how much I'd noticed. At 1:53 a.m., the alarm panel on the wall emitted a single high-pitched chirp. I froze. The rules were clear. If the warehouse alarm chirps once and nobody triggered it, stay where you are and do not speak for 1 minute. I stood perfectly still, my throat tight with the urge to call out, to ask if anyone else had heard it. The silence pressed in around me. Somewhere in the darkness, 2 aisles over, I heard something shuffle, a soft, dragging sound like fabric sliding across concrete. I clenched my jaw and kept silent. My legs trembled with the effort of staying motionless. The shuffling sound grew closer, moving past me, just out of sight beyond the nearest rack. I could hear something breathing slow, deliberate, rhythmic. It passed by. The sound faded into the distance. I counted the seconds in my head, waiting for the minute to end. When it did, the air pressure in the building seemed to shift, lightening, as if a door had been opened somewhere far away. I exhaled shakily and resumed my work. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been standing just a few feet away from me, separated only by a wall of cardboard boxes, watching and waiting to see if I'd break the rule. I didn't, but I knew I'd gotten lucky. The incident logs had given me answers, but they'd also given me more questions. The report stopped abruptly in 2013. Either corporate had started keeping better records somewhere else, or they'd simply stopped documenting what was happening in the warehouse altogether. Either way, I needed to know more. So the next evening, before Lena could leave, I cornered her in the office. I found the old reports, I said. The ones about aisle 17, about Miguel Reyes and David Chen and all the others. She went very still, her hand frozen on the doorknob. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then she let out a slow breath and turned to face. You shouldn't have gone looking for those, she said. Quietly, I needed to know what happened to Jared. Jared didn't follow the rules. That's not good enough, Lena. People are disappearing. The company knows about it, and they're just... What? Covering it up? Letting it keep happening? She closed the door and sat down heavily in the desk chair. It's not that simple. Then explain it to me. She looked older in the harsh fluorescent light, the lines around her eyes deeper than I'd realized. I worked the midnight shift for 3 years, she said finally. Before the current rules. Before they reduced it to 1 person per night. Back then, we thought we could handle it. Handle what? The building. She rubbed her face with both hands. It started small. Employees hearing things, seeing things. We thought it was stress, or maybe carbon monoxide from the forklifts. Corporate sent inspectors. They didn't find anything wrong. So we kept working. And then? And then it escalated. Her voice was flat, emotionless, like she was reciting a report. We had a busy period, 1 December holiday orders, everything running overtime. We kept the line going until 3 a.m. one night instead of shutting down at midnight, like usual. That's when people started hearing each other's voices from empty sections of the warehouse. Pallets moved by themselves. Miguel Reyes walked into aisle 11 to retrieve a box, and he never came back out. What do you mean, never came back? I mean, he walked into that aisle on camera, and the feed shows him disappearing between one frame and the next. No cuts, no glitches. He was just gone. We searched the entire building. Called the police. They found nothing. No body, no trace. It was like he'd been erased. I felt cold. And corporate? Corporate shut down operations for 2 days. Brought in consultants, security experts, even a priest, though they called him a cultural sensitivity advisor in the official report. Nothing worked. So they tried something else. The rules. She nodded. They brought in an expert, someone who specialized in what they called environmental anomalies. I don't know what that means exactly, but he spent a week here, observing, documenting. When he left, he gave us the protocols. Specific rules designed to minimize contact. Contact with what? He didn't say. Or maybe he did and corporate didn't want to hear it. Either way, the rules worked. The disappearances stopped, or at least slowed down. As long as we followed the protocols, people were safe, mostly. But Jared thought he was smarter than the building. Her voice hardened. He'd been warned. Everyone who works here gets warned. But he didn't take it seriously, and now he's gone. Just like Miguel. Just like the others. She stood and walked to a filing cabinet in the corner of the office. From the top drawer, she pulled out a burnt partial printout. The edges were blackened and curled, as if someone had tried to destroy it but hadn't finished the job. She handed it to me. The text was barely legible, but I could make out enough. Affected zone is considered compromised. Do not re-enter until at least 1 full day-night cycle has passed. It was the same draft procedure I'd found in the old reports, but this version had additional notes scrawled in the margins. One line, underlined multiple times: do not engage. Do not negotiate. Do not attempt to understand it. They didn't want us to have this, Lena said. Corporate wanted the simplified version, clean, deniable, something they could pass off as standard safety protocols. But I kept this copy because I needed to remember what we're really dealing with, which is... She shook her head. I don't know. None of us do. But whatever it is, it's been here longer than the warehouse. The building was constructed on an old rail yard, and before that, it was farmland. People have been disappearing from this area for over a century: workers, vagrants, kids who wandered too close. The warehouse just gave it a structure to work with. I stared at the burnt page in my hands. Why are you still here? Why do you keep coming back? Because someone has to make sure the rules are followed. Her voice softened. And because I'm responsible for the people who work here, even if they don't understand why. Before she left that night, she added one more thing, something that wasn't on the laminated rule sheet. If you ever see yourself on one of the camera feeds doing something you're not doing, she said. Her hand on the door. Don't look away. Don't blink. Watch it until it matches you again. If you look away, it becomes real. What does that mean? She didn't answer. She just left, and I was alone again with the warehouse and its impossible rules. That night, I watched the monitors more closely than I ever had before. Most of the feeds were normal empty aisles, stacked pallets, the occasional flicker of static. But around 3 a.m., one of the cameras showed something that made my blood run cold. It was me. Standing in aisle 9, facing the camera, arms at my sides. The figure on the screen was perfectly still, not moving, not breathing. I was in the office. I hadn't been near aisle 9 all night. I forced myself to keep watching, remembering Lena's words. The figure on the screen tilted its head slowly, unnaturally, like a puppet on strings. Then it raised one hand and pointed directly at the camera at me. I didn't blink. I didn't look away. My eyes watered, my vision blurring, but I kept staring at the screen. The figure stood there for what felt like an eternity, pointing, waiting, and then, between 1 second and the next, the feet cinched up. The figure on the screen became me sitting in the office chair, staring at the monitor with wide, terrified eyes. I exhaled shakily and looked down at my hands. They were trembling. Whatever was in the warehouse, it wasn't just watching me anymore. It was learning. I considered quitting after that night. I even drafted a resignation email on my phone during my drive home, thumb hovering over the send button. But I didn't press it. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the pragmatic part of my brain reminding me that I had rent due in 2 weeks and no other job lined up. Or maybe some part of me needed to understand what was happening to prove that there was a rational explanation buried beneath the horror. Whatever the reason, I returned to the warehouse the next night, and the night after that. But the building had changed. The atmosphere felt different, charged, like the air before a thunderstorm. The lights over the far loading docks began flickering in a rhythmic pattern around 1:30 a.m., pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. The HVAC system's hum shifted in pitch, becoming something that almost sounded like a voice if I listened too closely. Even the aisles felt wrong, the shadows deeper. The spaces between the racks somehow more claustrophobic. It was on my 9th night that everything came to a head. I was working methodically through aisle 6, scanning inventory and trying not to think about the monitors or the rules or Jared's folded safety vests still sitting in aisle 17, when the PA system crackled to life at 1:40 a.m. I froze, my scanner beeping uselessly in my hand. Hello? Is anyone there? The voice was panicked, breathless, distinctly human. Not the distorted, wrong-sounding voices I'd heard before, but a real person in genuine distress. Please, someone. Help me. I'm stuck. I can't get the door open. I'm by the south doors. My heart hammered in my chest. The south doors were the emergency exit on the far side of the warehouse, past the loading docks and the maintenance area. I'd never used them, but I knew they were supposed to be kept unlocked from the inside for safety reasons. I grabbed my radio. Identify yourself. What's your name? No response on the radio, but the PA voice continued, sobbing now. Please. Please, I don't want to die here alone. The phrasing sent a chill down my spine. I'd thought those exact words to myself on my first night, sitting alone in the office at 2:07 a.m. And wondering what the hell I'd gotten myself into. How could this voice know that? I checked the monitors. The feed from the south doors showed only darkness. The lights in that section were either off or the camera wasn't picking them up. Static occasionally rolled across the screen, but I couldn't see anyone there. Who are you? I called out into the empty warehouse, my voice echoing off the metal racks. The PA voice changed, becoming more desperate. I'm trapped. The door won't open. You have to help me, please. I reviewed the rules in my head. If you hear someone say your name over the intercom and no one is in the office, ignore it. But this wasn't my name. This was a plea for help, a person in danger. The rules didn't explicitly cover this scenario. My conscience warred with my instinct. What if it was real? What if someone, a delivery driver, a contractor, a lost employee from another shift, had gotten locked in? What if I ignored the call and someone actually died because I was too afraid to check? I made a decision I knew I'd regret. I grabbed a flashlight from the office and headed toward the south doors, my footsteps echoing in the empty warehouse. The PA voice continued intermittently, begging, crying, using phrases that felt too personal, too specific. As I got closer, I heard something else beneath the voice on the intercom. A faint knocking sound. 3 slow, deliberate raps that echoed through the metal loading dock doors. Knock, knock. I reached the south exit. It was a heavy steel door with a push-bar handle, a small reinforced window at eye level, and an emergency exit sign above it that cast everything in a sickly red glow. Through the window, I could see the parking lot outside empty, illuminated by a single flickering streetlight. The knocking came again, louder now. 3 slow raps, deliberate and patient, like someone trying to get my attention without startling me. Hello? I called out, my voice shaking. The PA voice whispered, so close it sounded like it was right behind my ear, "Open it, Mark." I spun around. The corridor behind me was empty. The intercom speaker was mounted on the wall 10 feet away, too far for the sound to have been that close. But I'd heard it, felt it, a whisper brushing against my ear like cold breath. My hand moved toward the door handle. Every human instinct I had screamed at me to open it, to help whoever was on the other side. But Lena's warnings echoed in my head, along with the burnt draft protocols. Do not engage. Do not negotiate. I forced myself to step back, my legs trembling. The knocking continued, 3 raps, rhythmic and insistent, mechanical in their precision. Knock. 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 "I can't help you," I whispered, my voice breaking. The knocking stopped abruptly, cutting off mid-hit as if the hand had frozen in place. The PA voice went silent. The corridor fell into a profound, suffocating quiet. I turned and ran back toward the office, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly off the walls. Behind me, I heard the south door rattle violently in its frame, the metal groaning as if something was pushing against it from the outside or pulling it from within. I reached the office at 2:06 a.m., slamming the door shut and locking it just as the clock ticked over to 2:07. I collapsed into the chair, gasping, my entire body shaking with adrenaline and terror. The building went silent. The monitors were dark. I turned them off before leaving, following the rule. I sat there in the dim glow of the emergency lighting, listening to my own ragged breathing and the faint hum of the HVAC. At 2:10 a.m., I turned the monitors back on. Most of the feeds were normal. Empty aisles, stacked pallets, the usual grainy black and white footage. But the south door camera made me stop breathing. The feed showed the door from an exterior angle. And standing directly in front of it, facing the camera, was a figure. It was impossibly tall and thin, its proportions all wrong, like someone had stretched a human body on a rack until it barely resembled anything organic. Its head was tilted at a severe angle, and though the grainy footage made details difficult, I could see that it was looking directly at the camera, directly at me. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, perfectly still, as the seconds ticked by. Then slowly it raised one long, spindly arm and pressed its hand flat against the camera lens, covering the feed completely. The screen went black. When the image returned a moment later, the figure was gone. The parking lot was empty again. Just the flickering streetlight and the pavement reflecting the faint glow. I sat in that office until my shift ended at 8 a.m., too terrified to leave, too exhausted to process what I'd seen. When the morning light finally seeped through the narrow windows near the roofline, the warehouse seemed ordinary again, just a building, just concrete and metal and stacked boxes. But I knew better now. The rules weren't just about survival. They were about boundaries. The moment I'd walked toward that door, the moment I'd considered opening it, I'd crossed a line. And whatever was in the warehouse, whatever had been calling, to me, knocking, whispering, had known exactly how to make me want to cross it. I'd resisted, barely, but next time I might not be strong enough. I should have known the warehouse wouldn't let it go. I'd tested the boundaries, come too close to breaking the rules, and now something had shifted. The building wasn't just watching anymore, it was actively engaged, probing for weaknesses, looking for the moment when my resolve would finally crack. The next night, I arrived at 11:30 p.m. to find the parking lot empty except for my car. No supervisor's van. No note from Lena, just a text message on my phone. Emergency. Can't be there tonight. Follow the rules. Do not deviate. I clocked in alone, the warehouse vast and silent around me. The lights seemed dimmer than usual, the shadows between the racks deeper and more substantial. When I turned on my scanner, the device took longer than normal to boot up, the screen flickering with corrupted data before finally displaying the inventory map. Except, the map was wrong. Aisle 17 appeared in 3 different locations at once, overlapping, intersecting, existing in spaces that shouldn't have been possible within the building's physical layout. I turned the scanner off and on again. The glitch persisted. At 12:05 a.m., the warehouse alarm system began chirping, not the single tone from before, but a rapid series of electronic beeps, like a system error. Then the sound cut out completely, and the emergency exit signs began flickering in that same slow, pulsing rhythm I'd noticed before. I headed for the office, intending to check the circuit breakers, but when I turned the corner past aisle 10, I found myself somehow back at aisle 8. I'd been walking in a straight line. I was certain of it, but the numbers on the floor had reversed. I tried again, moving more carefully, keeping my eyes on the aisle markers. Aisle 10, 11, 12. Then I turned the corner and I was at aisle 10 again. Approaching the same intersection from the same direction, the warehouse was looping. My pulse quickened. I remembered the burnt draft protocols. If the warehouse begins looping aisles, the affected zone is considered compromised. But the document had said to evacuate. How could I evacuate if the building wouldn't let me reach the exit? I changed tactics, heading toward the loading docks instead of the office. But every corridor I took, every turn I made, led me back to the same cluster of aisles 10 through 14, circling endlessly like a maze designed by someone who understood geometry but had no respect for it. At 1:47 a.m., the PA system came on, not with voices this time, but with a low, rumbling static that vibrated through the speakers and into my bones. Underneath the static, I could hear something that might have been words. Multiple voices speaking over each other, reciting the rules and overlapping. Discordant tones. My radio crackled to life. Lena's voice breaking through the interference. Mark, don't trust. Scanners. Original layout, Lena? Where are you? But the signal dissolved into static, replaced by my own voice saying, follow the rules. Follow the rules. Follow the rules in a flat, mechanical monotone. I turned the radio off and forced myself to think. The building was disorienting me, using the very tools and markers I relied on to navigate against me. But there was one thing the warehouse couldn't fake: my memory. Closed my eyes and visualized the layout from my first night before I'd memorized the aisle numbers. When I'd been moving purely by spatial awareness. The office was northwest of the main entrance. The loading docks were on the eastern side. Aisle 17 was near the center, flanked by storage pallets and a clear path to the back section. I opened my eyes and started walking backward. It felt wrong, irrational, dangerous. But I kept going, my back to the direction I was moving. My eyes focused on where I'd been rather than where I was going. I counted pallets instead of reading numbers, feeling the texture of the concrete beneath my feet, trusting muscle memory instead of visual cues. The warehouse groaned around me, the metal racks creaking and shifting. The lights flickered wildly, and I heard footsteps, multiple sets, coming from every direction at once. I caught glimpses of figures in the periphery, shadowy shapes without safety vests, moving parallel to me through adjacent aisles, keeping pace. I didn't look directly at them. I kept moving backward, counting, breathing, forcing myself not to panic. When I finally stopped and turned around, I was standing in front of the office door. The clock on the wall read 2:06 a.m. I wrenched the door open and stumbled inside, slamming it shut just as the second hand swept to 2:07. Immediately, something heavy slammed against the door from the outside once, twice, 3 times. The handle rattled violently, the metal groaning under pressure. The PA system crackled on inside the office. The voice clearer than it had ever been. You can't stay in there forever, Mark. It was my voice. Not distorted, not wrong, exactly how I sounded when I spoke aloud. And underneath it, I heard something else. Laughter. Low and patient, like someone who had all the time in the world. The pressure against the door continued until exactly 2:10 a.m., then it stopped. The handle went still. The PA fell silent. I sat in the chair, drenched in sweat, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the armrests. When I finally turned on the monitors, the feeds showed empty aisles again, the layout normal, everything exactly as it should be, but I knew it was a lie. The warehouse had tried to consume me tonight. And it had only failed because I'd been lucky, or maybe because some small part of the building still respected the rules. Even as it bent them to their breaking point, I stayed in that office until 8 a.m. Not daring to leave, not trusting that the building would let me go if I stepped back onto the floor. When the morning light finally broke through the high windows, I unlocked the door and walked out through the main entrance without looking back. My car was still in the parking lot, exactly where I'd left it. The warehouse looked ordinary in the daylight, just a building. Just concrete and metal and morning shadows, but I'd felt something in there during the night. In those looping aisles and flickering lights. A presence. An intelligence. Something that had been testing me, measuring me, deciding whether I was worth keeping. I got in my car and drove away, knowing with absolute certainty that I couldn't go back. Not tonight. Not ever. I sent my resignation email from the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, my hand still shaking as I typed. I kept it vague, cited personal reasons and unsafe working conditions without going into detail. I knew corporate wouldn't care about the specifics. They'd process these kinds of departures before. Lena responded within 2 hours. Understood. Come by this afternoon to collect your final check. We'll handle the paperwork. When I arrived at the warehouse at 3 p.m., the building looked completely different in the daylight. The concrete walls were sun-bleached and weathered. The loading docks busy with afternoon deliveries. Forklifts beeping as they moved pallets into trucks. Normal, mundane, the kind of place you'd drive past without a second thought. Lena met me in the office. She had my final paycheck in an envelope, along with a separation agreement that I signed without reading. We didn't talk about what had happened. We didn't need to. As I stood to leave, she slid something across the desk, another laminated sheet, freshly printed. The header read, Midnight Operations Safety and Conduct Rules, Revised. I scanned the list. The original rules were still there, along with 2 new additions. If the aisle map changes during your shift, do not trust the scanners. Trust the original layout. If you hear multiple voices reciting the rules at once, you are not alone anymore. Leave if you still can. Below the printed text, someone had added a handwritten note in pen. If the building begins looping on itself, walk backward and count pallets. Do not trust visual markers. You added my experience to the rules, I said quietly. Lena nodded. So the next person has a better chance. There shouldn't be a next person. You should shut this place down. Corporate won't allow it. Too much invested in the property, too many contracts. She looked tired, more tired than I'd ever seen her. All we can do is manage it. Contain it. Make sure people know what they're walking into. I wanted to argue, to tell her that managing it wasn't enough, that eventually the building would claim someone no matter how many rules they followed. But I could see in her eyes that she already knew. She'd known for years. What is it? I asked. What's really in that warehouse? She was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, she said finally. But I think it's something that was here before the warehouse. Before the rail yard. Maybe before there was anything here at all. The building just gave it a shape to work with, rules to follow. As long as we respect its boundaries, it respects ours, mostly. And when it doesn't? She didn't answer. I left the warehouse for the last time just after 4 p.m. As I walked to my car, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A small memorial plaque mounted near the employee entrance, partially obscured by ivy and weathering. It listed names and dates employees who had served with distinction. I recognized some of them from the incident reports. Miguel Reyes, David Chen, Sarah Kim, Jared. Connolly's name wasn't on the plaque yet, but it would be. I got in my car and drove away, watching the warehouse shrink in my rearview mirror until it disappeared behind the abandoned tire factory. I'd escaped. I'd survived. But I knew that others wouldn't be so lucky. The building would keep taking people, one by one, as long as corporate kept the doors open and employees kept showing up for the graveyard shift. That night, I was lying in bed, unable to sleep despite my exhaustion, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail notification. The number was unknown. I almost deleted it without listening, but something made me press play. My own voice came through the speaker, slightly distorted by the phone's compression. This is Mark Davis, Midnight Inventory. Rules acknowledged. I'd never recorded that message. I'd never said those words, but the warehouse had. 3 days later, I saw a job posting online for a midnight inventory specialist at the Midwest Distribution Center. Premium pay. Minimal supervision. The listing made it sound appealing, almost too good to be true. I thought about sending an anonymous warning to anyone who might apply, but what would I say? That the building was haunted? That the rules were real? No one would believe me. I hadn't believed it myself until I'd lived it. Instead, I closed the browser and tried to forget. But some nights, when I'm lying in bed and the house is quiet, I hear it. A faint, rhythmic knocking. 3 slow raps that echo through the walls like someone trying to get my attention. And underneath it, so quiet I almost convince myself I'm imagining it. I hear the PA voice whispering my name. The warehouse might have let me go. But I'm not sure it's done with me yet, and somewhere, right now, a new hire is sitting in that office at 11:30 p.m. reading the laminated rule sheet for the first time and thinking to themselves, it's just a factory. What's the worst that could happen? The lights overhead will flicker once, then steady, like the building answering dot and at midnight, when the last of the day crew leaves and the new hire is finally alone. They'll understand what I learned the hard way. Some rules exist for a reason, and some places are better left in the dark.